Coming out of the thick mist from the south, the Kariba's crew spot the Clary about to cross their path. The Kariba turns hard to starboard to avoid a collision, and officers on the Tricolor's bridge watch the Kariba turn, aiming directly at them. The motor vessel Tricolor was a 50,000-ton vehicle carrier sailing under a Norwegian flag. The $25 million ship was constructed by the Japanese shipbuilding company Tsunashi and launched in 1987 under the name Nosak Sun. In 1996, the Nosak Sun was sold to the Norwegian company Wilhelmsen and renamed Tricolor. The Tricolor measured 190 meters in length and 32 meters in width. The crew consisted of 22 Filipinos, 1 Swede, and the Norwegian captain. At midnight on the 14th of December 2002, the motor vessel Tricolor departs the port of Zeebrugge, Belgium, carrying 2,871 brand new luxury vehicles, including BMWs, Volvos, and Saabs, valued at around $47.7 million. It also had 77 containers filled with tractor and crane parts. The ship is heading to Southampton in the UK before making the journey over the Atlantic to its final destination in the US. After setting sail, the crew head to their cabins. The captain, the second mate, and an able seaman are on the bridge, and the third engineer is in the engine room. The Tricolor heads west at 17.9 knots in dense fog and prepares to cross into the north-south shipping lane of the English Channel. Shipping lanes called traffic separation schemes are like highways, and the Tricolor is sailing towards a junction close to the boundary between Belgian and British waters, roughly 20 nautical miles north of Dunkirk in France. Motor vessel Kariba is sailing at 16 knots in the same direction, slightly ahead on Tricolor's port side, about half a mile away. The 20,000-ton, 177-meter container ship Kariba is traveling from Antwerp to Western Africa. At 02:15, the Tricolor maneuvers to overtake the container ship Kariba. Because of the dense fog, the crew on the Kariba can't actually see the Tricolor behind them to their right. Their attention is focused on the intersection of the traffic separation scheme in front of them. On their navigation screen, the crew of the Kariba watch another ship approaching, the Clary, a 139-meter bulk carrier. Clary's second officer is by himself on the bridge. He watches the two vessels on his radar to his starboard or right-hand side. He thinks about making a significant turn to starboard, allowing all ships to pass port to port, which is the maritime convention. But even though the coast is clear to make that turn, he's restricted by the limitations of the channel, and so he continues dead ahead. Even though the fog is thick and maritime law requires ships to sound their foghorns, all three ships remain silent. Then, as expected, out of the thick fog from the south, the crew on board Kariba spot the Clary running at 13 knots, heading north, about to cross its path. But it's closer than they anticipated. Kariba turns hard to starboard to avoid a collision with Clary. Officers on Tricolor's bridge watch the Kariba while they overtake the ship to starboard. Kariba suddenly turns to the right, heading straight towards them. In an attempt to dodge the oncoming ship, the captain of the Tricolor turns his rudder hard to starboard, but it's too late. The Kariba's bow strikes the port or left side of the Tricolor just behind the bridge. The bulbous bow of the Kariba tears a hole behind Tricolor's watertight bulkhead and punctures the number 3 port fuel oil tank. As the Tricolor shudders from the crash, everyone on board is shaken awake by the horrifying sound of twisting metal. The men on the bridge quickly sound the general alarm to alert everyone on board and send out a distress call over the radio. The crew gather quickly at their mustering station while the ship starts to take on water and lists to port. The third engineer in the engine room escapes through the elevator shaft and joins the others on deck. The crew at the mustering station launch an inflatable life raft and abandon ship. Despite having a severely damaged bow, the Kariba is in better shape than the Tricolor. Its crew launches a lifeboat and starts looking for the Tricolor's life raft in the fog. The second officer on the approaching ship, Clary, decides that the two ships have simply kissed or lightly touched, and so he ignores the distress call, erases his charts to hide his tracks, and sails away, disappearing into the fog. The Tricolor lists heavily to port, and the officers on the bridge are forced into the ice-cold winter water of the English Channel. Even though it's a dark, foggy night, the three men are found quite quickly and rescued by the Caribe's lifeboat. A Belgian tugboat named Boxer responds to the emergency call and picks up the remaining 21 crew members on Tricolor's life raft. The Belgian Navy and French Coast Guard are alerted. Tugs and an emergency towing vessel from the UK Coast Guard are dispatched to the location. But by the time they arrive on the scene, it's too late. The Tricolor turns and sinks in less than half an hour, hitting the sandy bottom on its port side in 30 meters of water. At 32 meters wide on the beam, the starboard section of the ship breaks the waterline. The Tricolor sinks at the intersection of two lanes in the traffic separation scheme in French waters. It's one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, with 18% of the world's ocean traffic passing through this junction. Every day, 400 or 500 ships transit the junction on their way to Antwerp, Rotterdam, Bremen, and Hamburg, some of the biggest ports in Europe. With all the 24 crew members of the Tricolor safe and accounted for, the Caribe limps back to the Belgian port of Antwerp. The Tricolor sinks not only in the middle of a busy part of the North Sea, but also in an open area outside the Flemish banks, exposed to the wind, waves, and strong tidal currents. The French authorities are concerned that the wreck is a navigational hazard and a possible source of pollution, so they prepare an anti-pollution strategy to handle the situation. The Channel and North Sea region's Préfecture Maritime promptly implements emergency protocols and contracts a company that specializes in accidental water contamination named CEDAR, who dispatches an expert to the site. The specialist evaluates the risk of pollution from the fuel and oil on board the ship. The Tricolor is carrying 200 tons of diesel oil, 25 tons of lubricating oil, and 2,000 tons of heavy fuel oil, which are split between 8 ballast tanks. They're all intact and there are no indications of any leaks. To alert vessels passing through the area, a maritime patrol boat is positioned at the wreck site. 3 light buoys, each 10 meters high and 2.65 meters wide, are anchored 150 meters from the wreck to mark the actual location. The Dover Coast Guard and French officials broadcast a VHF radio warning about the hazard every hour. The ship's insurance contracts the rescue and salvage company Smith Salvage to empty the Tricolor's oil tank in order to minimize the risk of pollution. Smith dispatches 2 barges to assess the project and assist in securing the site. On the 16th of December, just 2 days after the incident, a 3,000-ton Dutch cargo ship named Nicola collides with the Tricolor wreckage. The Nicola is empty at the time and sustains only minor damage. The 2 Smith tugs pull the Nicola off the wreck, and it's able to sail away under its own steam. French and English patrol boats are dispatched to rearrange the marking system around the wreck. One buoy with a Raycon system is placed 600 meters away. The Raycon emits a radar echo that's visible on all screens. A further 5 cardinal light buoy markers are placed 600 meters away from the wreck. Cardinal markers indicate the compass position a vessel must keep to avoid a hazard. The French, Belgians, and British fly helicopters over the wreck every day to monitor for oil leaks. The Asian Hercules II floating crane is sent to the wreck site to serve as a work platform for the salvage team's divers when they extract the oil. It's dangerous work. They have to inspect the ship in winter conditions, which bring strong winds, breaking waves, and large swell, along with the strong tidal currents in the English Channel. Because the ship's on its side, the divers have access to the bottom of the hull, which allows them to drill holes through the keel and into the ballast tanks to connect valves. They connect hoses and a pump to siphon out the oil into a barge. On the 21st of December, a week after the ship sank, Smith Salvage start pumping oil out of the vessel. The procedure is called lightering, where liquid cargo is transferred from one vessel to another. 3 days later, the French authorities give the order to remove the wreck. It's a hazard to shipping and the environment, and it needs to be removed. At 19:20 on the 1st of January 2003, a Turkish oil carrier, Vicky, misses the Raycon transmission on their navigation station, 6 light beacons, hourly VHF radio warnings, and the French Navy vessel permanently stationed nearby, and collides with the wreck at full speed. Vicky is 244 meters long and weighs 43,500 tons. It's carrying 70,000 tons of gasoline and more than 2,000 tons of heavy fuel oil. As the tide rises, Vicky manages to refloat itself, and just 4 hours later at 2300, it sails a mile away to an anchorage to assess its damage. The next day, a French Navy helicopter notices the Tricolor's exposed starboard side has sunk further because of the collision, and Vicky has a ruptured bow tank which is seeping oil into the water. Because of poor weather, the cleanup operations at sea can't start for a few days. More than 200 oil-soaked birds are rescued. Over the next week, a portion of Vicky's cargo is lighted into another vessel, and on the 12th of January, the ship leaves the anchorage. Under pressure from French, British, and Belgian authorities, the Wilhelmsen Group invites salvage companies to tender for the salvage of the wreck. The wreck has to be removed as soon as possible, with careful consideration for the environment. Only 3 companies submit tenders for the operation. On the 22nd of January 2003, in poor weather conditions, the diver's barge collides with the wreck and damages 2 valves in the fuel tank. Tons of heavy fuel spills into the sea. The Wilhelmsen Group send anti-pollution vessels along the French and Belgian coasts to contain the spill. On the 17th of February, the salvage team complete the lightering process after extracting as much fuel and oil as they can from the vessel. But they only recover 1,700 tons of the 2,225 tons of oil Tricolor was carrying. Significant amounts of oil are left in the ship's hold and engine room tanks. Pollution management control records show that a total of 170 tons of oil are spilled into the sea through small cracks in the fuel tanks. On the 11th of April, the Wilhelmsen Group award the salvage contract to a consortium of companies. The Dutch company Smit Salvage leads the program in partnership with Skelders Salvage, URS Salvage and Marine Contracting, and Multraship Salvage. The consortium faces a challenging task of removing the large vessel in rough waters and in a busy shipping channel. Sitting on its port side on the seafloor, the 32-meter wide Tricolor's hull is too large and heavy to be lifted in one place, and the location in the tidal shipping channel makes it impractical to construct equipment to roll the ship upright and refloat it. The salvage team's best course of action is to cut the carrier into smaller, more manageable sections. After extensive planning, the salvage team decide to divide the wreck into 9 segments, each weighing between 4,000 and 6,000 tons. The cuts must be precise, which means the operation needs accurate positioning and navigation systems, as well as a detailed survey of the wreck and its location. A long-range kinematic or LRK system is used by the salvagers to get the best positioning accuracy for the project. The LRK receiver connects to the Belgian and Netherlands-based LRK GPS network stations. Accuracy is improved by adding land-based fixed beacons to the calculations. The LRK network has comprehensive coverage of the coastline regions for both Belgium and Holland, with a range of around 30 nautical miles and an accuracy down to a few centimeters. The salvage team uses LRK equipment to do a multi-beam echo-sounding hydrographic survey. Multi-beam echo-sounding is a type of sonar used to map the seabed. The output of the survey is a 3-dimensional map of the wreck with an accurate position. 2 work platforms are set up on either side of the wreck. The platforms are stabilized by extendable legs on the sea floor 30 meters below the waterline. Once the work platforms are in position, the divers inspect the Tricolor's hull, mark the 8 cut sections, and install multiple bollards or lashing points on each segment. Lifting cables will be attached to the bollards when the wreck sections are cut and pulled out of the water by cranes. The lead salvage company, Smith, also salvaged the Russian submarine Kursk 2 years earlier in 2001. They used the same cutting wire from that salvage operation. I'll leave a link to the video about the salvage of the Russian submarine Kursk here if you haven't seen it. An anti-pollution vessel is available during the entire operation, with the French and Belgian authorities closely monitoring to prevent possible damage to the environment. On the 22nd of July 2003, the first cut is started. The team used directional drilling equipment to install the cutting wires under the ship. The directional drill system is operated by engineers on the platform. When the drill emerges from the seabed on the other side of the wreck, a hollow tube is attached and the drill is pulled back. The cutting wire is then passed from one end of this tube to the other. The cutting wire is a steel cable 100 meters long, 38 centimeters thick, and covered in spiked cylinders or bushings that make a serrated edge. The bushings are coated with a material called Whittier, which is almost as hard as diamonds. The cutting wire is strung under the ship between two platforms with a power winch on each platform. The wire is gradually tightened, turning the cable into a giant chainsaw, moving back and forth, slowly slicing through the ship from the bottom to the top. The stern with the engine is the first to be cut. When the wire gets to the propeller shaft, they swap out the cutting wire for a fresh one to cut through the solid metal shaft. Divers constantly check the cutting wire and the vessel for any changes in position. Surface crew monitor the situation through a camera feed from the diver's helmets. In good weather, the first section takes about 30 hours to cut. The divers examine the integrity of the segment after it's cut and weld lifting frames to the sides to reinforce weak areas. Then they connect the lifting cables to the bollards. The cutting wire cuts clean through every deck, including the engine. Two giant shear legs or floating cranes, the Rambas and Asian Hercules II, lift the first section out of the water. The stern section is lifted slowly to allow water to drain from the ship. The higher it's raised out of the water, the more weight is transferred onto the massive shear legs. The center of gravity has to remain steady and the weight must be split equally between the two shear legs. As the stern segment rises, ballast water is pumped out of the forward ballast tanks on the lift barges. More ballast water is added to the aft ballast tanks. The stern section is slowly lowered onto the barge Giant 4, which is the same barge used during the Kursk salvage. Giant 4 heads for the port of Zeebrugge in Belgium, where a dedicated scrapyard has been set up to dismantle the 9 segments. Plastic is laid down to cover the ground soil from oil spills, and metal plates are positioned on top to take the weight of the wreck. The ship's metal will be recycled and the luxury cars will be dismantled in different factories throughout Belgium. Each car needs a disposal certificate from the manufacturer. The vehicle makers demand that all cars must be recovered and disposed of entirely to prevent any damaged parts being sold, which could lead to claims on faulty parts in the future. After each segment is removed, the divers conduct a thorough side scan sonar of the wreck site and along the route Giant 4 travels between the wreck site and the port, just to make sure no cars are left behind. On the 7th of September, around 300 tons of heavy fuel spills out of the wreck, contaminating large portions of French and Belgian beaches. About 3 weeks later, on the 17th of October, the 8th and final cut is complete, with 4 segments still in the water waiting to be lifted and towed away. The salvage team have towed 5 sections to Zeebrugge. After about a month of winter storms and gale force winds, they decide to delay removing the remaining 4 segments because of the dangerous weather conditions. Over the winter, waves and surge batter the last 4 segments, and without the reinforced structure of the ship to support them, they start to fall apart. The contract for the salvage requires the team to remove all the wreckage from the seafloor. But the weakened structural integrity of the remaining segments means they can't lift them using the crane. In order to clear the site of scattered cars, debris, and buckling metal, the salvage team are forced to reconsider their approach. Nearing summer 2004, the salvage team crew used the side scan sonar to remap the debris field. After the damage from the winter storms, looking for the smaller pieces is a difficult job, so they bring in a magnetometer, which is a large metal detector, to locate debris buried under the mud and sand. The locations of debris are plotted on a chart, and a systematic search and recovery operation follows. The salvage team uses a crane with a wreck grab or giant claw to bring the pieces of debris to the surface. It's a slow and long process compared to lifting the barge sections. Over the summer months, the debris field is slowly and methodically cleared. In October 2004, the final piece is brought to the surface, completing the salvage of Tricolor from the busy shipping channel. Over 10,000 seabirds were discovered dead on beaches along the coastline after the various oil spills. In January 2006, the US District Court rules that Kariba's decision to turn to starboard was the only factor that caused the collision. The owners of Kariba and Tricolor filed an appeal, arguing that Kariba's actions weren't the sole cause of the collision. During the appeal, the circuit court finds that all three vessels are at fault. Kariba turned to starboard and didn't reduce its speed. Tricolor didn't slow down and tried to pass Kariba in the fog in a high traffic channel with the Clary northbound. And Clary was supposed to have more than one person on the bridge and didn't alter course to avoid a collision. The 16-month salvage operation cost around $40 million, along with the loss of the vehicle carrier and its cargo at around $88 million, makes for a total loss of around $128 million, which is worth over $200 million today.